In the year 44 BC, inside the marble halls of the Roman Senate, the most powerful man in the Roman world collapsed onto the cold stone floor beneath the statue of a general he had once defeated, his white toga turning dark with blood as senators who had just sworn loyalty to him stepped backward in stunned silence while the echoes of the attack slowly faded through the chamber. The man lying dead was Julius Caesar, the conqueror of Gaul, the architect of Rome's expanding empire, and a leader whose power had grown so immense that many of Rome's most influential men had begun to fear that the Republic itself would soon disappear beneath the weight of his authority. Moments earlier, more than 20 senators had surrounded him with hidden daggers, striking again and again until the most famous political assassination in Roman history was complete. The conspirators believed they had just saved the Roman Republic from tyranny, imagining that once Caesar was dead, the city would erupt in celebration, and the ancient system of senatorial rule would immediately return. But as the conspirators stood there holding blood-stained blades, something unexpected happened. The crowd outside the Senate did not cheer. The streets did not erupt in triumph. Instead, an uneasy silence spread across Rome as word of the assassination began moving through the city like a slow approaching storm. Within hours, the men who had believed themselves to be liberators realized that killing Caesar had not ended a crisis. It had started one. Before this story is finished, the assassins who believed they were heroes will become fugitives. Rome will descend into chaos, and the Republic they claim to defend will collapse into one of the most brutal civil wars in its history. Because the death of Julius Caesar did not restore the Republic, it unleashed forces far more dangerous than anything the conspirators had imagined. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden turning points of history, where ambition, fear, and revenge collide to reshape entire civilizations, then subscribe to the channel and like this video, because the story of what happened to Caesar's assassins reveals how quickly political murder can spiral into catastrophe. To understand the fate of the conspirators, we must begin in the hours immediately after the assassination itself, when the men who had just changed the course of Roman history suddenly realized they had no clear plan for what came next. The group that carried out the attack included some of the most respected senators in Rome, among them Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, both men who believed they were defending the ancient traditions of republican government. Brutus in particular carried a powerful symbolic legacy because his ancestor had helped overthrow the last Roman king centuries earlier, an act that founded the Republic the conspirators believed they were now saving again. Yet despite the historical symbolism surrounding the assassination, the reality unfolding in Rome looks nothing like the triumphant restoration the conspirators had imagined. The senators who had stabbed Caesar quickly fled the Senate House, fearing that Caesar's supporters might retaliate before they could explain their actions to the public. Outside the building, they attempted to present themselves as defenders of liberty, raising their daggers and proclaiming that the Republic had been freed from a tyrant. But the reaction from the Roman population was confused rather than celebratory. Many citizens had benefited from Caesar's reforms, which had included debt relief, land redistribution, and political representation for groups that had long been ignored by the traditional elite. To them, the assassination looked less like the defense of liberty and more like the violent murder of a leader who had improved their lives. Meanwhile, powerful political figures who had not participated in the conspiracy were already calculating how the sudden power vacuum might reshape the balance of authority inside Rome. One of those figures was Mark Antony, a close ally of Caesar, who had narrowly escaped being killed alongside him when the conspirators decided not to attack anyone else inside the Senate chamber. Antony initially pretended to cooperate with the assassins, recognizing that confronting them directly while tensions were high might provoke immediate bloodshed across the city. At the same time, he began quietly organizing Caesar's supporters and securing political alliances that would soon transform him into the most dangerous opponent the conspirators faced. Another critical figure had not even been in Rome when the assassination occurred. Far away in the city of Apollonia was a young man named Augustus, the adopted heir of Julius Caesar, who had only recently begun preparing for a political career under his famous guardian's protection. When news of Caesar's death reached him, the 18-year-old made a decision that would ultimately change the future of Rome forever. He would return to the capital and claim the inheritance left to him in Caesar's will. Back in Rome, the conspirators attempted to stabilize the political situation by negotiating a fragile compromise with Caesar's supporters, hoping to avoid immediate civil war. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that the city might accept a peaceful transition back to republican government. That illusion collapsed during Caesar's funeral. When the body of Julius Caesar was displayed before the Roman public, the scale of his popularity became impossible to ignore. Crowds filled the streets as citizens gathered to witness the ceremony honoring the fallen leader. Then Mark Antony delivered a speech that would become one of the most famous moments in Roman political history. Standing before the crowd, he read Caesar's will aloud, revealing that the dictator had left money to the citizens of Rome and opened his private gardens for public use. The gesture transformed public anger into open fury against the conspirators. Suddenly, the assassins who had claimed to defend the Republic were seen by many Romans as traitors who had murdered a leader beloved by the people. The crowd erupted in outrage, and the political atmosphere in Rome became so dangerous that the conspirators were forced to flee the city. Among them were the two men who had played the central roles in organizing the assassination. Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus escaped eastward, hoping to gather support in the provinces where Roman armies and loyal governors might still recognize their authority. But the struggle they had started in Rome was only beginning, because the men now rising to power in the capital had no intention of forgiving the murder of Caesar. And soon the conspirators would learn that assassinating the most powerful man in Rome had consequences far more deadly than they had imagined. The months that followed the assassination transformed Rome into a city gripped by uncertainty, where alliances shifted rapidly, rumors traveled faster than armies, and every political decision seemed to push the Republic closer to a conflict that many feared would become the most devastating civil war the Roman world had ever experienced. Far from the capital, the leading conspirators began gathering resources and support, convinced that if they could assemble enough military strength in the eastern provinces, they might still defeat the forces rising in Caesar's name and restore the political system they believed they had defended with their daggers. At the center of this effort stood Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, two men whose reputations as defenders of the Republic helped them attract senators, governors, and military officers who feared that Caesar's death would soon lead to the rise of an even more powerful dictatorship. In the eastern Mediterranean, they began assembling legions, collecting funds from provincial treasuries, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the forces now dominating politics in Rome. Meanwhile, events inside the capital were moving with terrifying speed. The young heir of Caesar, Augustus, arrived in Italy determined to claim the inheritance left to him by the murdered dictator, even though he was barely 18 years old and surrounded by rivals far more experienced in the brutal world of Roman politics. At first, many of Rome's powerful figures underestimated him, believing that the teenager would become a minor player easily manipulated by older generals and senators. They would soon discover that the quiet, calculating young man possessed a political instinct as sharp as any weapon carried by the soldiers who followed him. Within a year of Caesar's assassination, Rome's political landscape hardened into two opposing camps preparing for war. On one side stood the assassins and their supporters, who claimed they were defending the Republic from tyranny. On the other stood a new alliance, determined to avenge Caesar and consolidate power in his name. This alliance would become known as the Second Triumvirate, a political and military coalition formed by Augustus, Mark Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Unlike earlier political agreements in Roman history, this alliance possessed official legal authority granted by the Roman state, effectively transforming the three men into rulers with extraordinary powers to reorganize the government and eliminate their enemies. One of their first actions shocked even a society accustomed to political violence. They initiated a series of proscriptions, official lists of individuals declared enemies of the state, whose property could be seized and whose lives were legally forfeit. Dozens of prominent Romans were executed, their wealth confiscated to finance the coming war against the conspirators. Among the victims was the famous orator Cicero, who had opposed the growing power of the triumvirs, and whose death symbolized the collapse of the political freedoms that had once defined the Roman Republic. While these brutal purges reshaped the political landscape in Italy, the armies of the conspirators continued preparing for the decisive confrontation that everyone now understood was unavoidable. By 42 BC, the forces loyal to the assassins had gathered in Macedonia, controlling large territories and commanding a powerful army that many believed could still defeat the coalition formed by Caesar's successors. The leaders of this army were the very men who had struck the fatal blows in the Senate chamber 2 years earlier. Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus now faced the ultimate test of whether their decision to kill Caesar had truly saved the Republic or merely doomed it to endless war. The final confrontation occurred near the city of Philippi in northern Greece, where the armies of the triumvirs and the conspirators met in one of the most decisive battles in Roman history. The field surrounding Philippi soon filled with tens of thousands of soldiers preparing for combat that would determine the future of Rome itself. The first clash produced chaotic fighting across the battlefield, with both sides experiencing moments of success and disaster. During the confusion, a tragic misunderstanding sealed the fate of one of the leading conspirators. Believing incorrectly that his forces had been defeated and that Brutus had already been captured, Gaius Cassius Longinus chose to take his own life rather than face what he believed would be inevitable execution. When news of Cassius's death reached Brutus, the remaining leader of the conspirators understood that the situation had become far more desperate. Yet he continued the struggle, reorganizing his remaining forces for a second battle against the armies commanded by Caesar's successors. Weeks later, the two sides clashed again on the same battlefield. This time the result was decisive. The armies of the triumvirs overwhelmed the remaining Republican forces, shattering the last organized resistance led by the assassins. Realizing that defeat was unavoidable and unwilling to be paraded through Rome as a captured enemy, Marcus Junius Brutus chose the same fate as his fallen ally. He took his own life on the battlefield, ending the career of the man many had once believed would restore the Roman Republic. With the deaths of Brutus and Cassius, the conspiracy that had killed Caesar effectively collapsed. Other participants in the assassination were hunted down in the years that followed, dying in battle, committing suicide, or disappearing into exile as the triumvirs consolidated their power. Ironically, the assassination meant to save the Republic had achieved the exact opposite result. Instead of restoring the old system of government, it accelerated the rise of a new political order dominated by powerful military leaders. In the decades that followed, the young heir of Caesar Augustus would emerge as the sole ruler of Rome, establishing the imperial system that would govern the Roman world for centuries. The republic that Brutus and the other conspirators believed they were protecting never truly returned. Their decision to strike down Julius Caesar inside the Senate chamber became one of the most famous turning points in world history, not because it saved Rome from dictatorship, but because it helped create the empire that replaced the Republic forever. And the men who believed they would be remembered as liberators instead became symbols of a tragic lesson repeated throughout history. Political violence rarely restores stability. More often, it unleashes forces far beyond the control of those who begin it. If you want to continue exploring the dramatic and often shocking moments where ambition, betrayal, and power reshape the course of ancient history, subscribe to the channel and like the video, because the story of Caesar's assassins reminds us that sometimes the most famous act of rebellion in history can lead to consequences far darker than anyone involved ever expected.